Hi, I'm your host, BNEWS producer Sydney Bowles, and on this episode of BNEWS In Depth, we're talking about money, buildings, and what kind of town Burlington wants to be. Right now, Burlington is facing three relatively urgent capital projects, that is, 3 buildings in need of upgrades or replacement. The Fox Hill Elementary School, the Burlington High School, and the police station. And some say the Pine Glen Elementary School should be updated as well. In an era of sky-high construction costs, it's millions of dollars of expense, much larger than anything Burlington has undertaken before. So what's happening right now? The committee in charge of rebuilding Fox Hill has recently decided to pursue a smaller model, meaning there's no current plan to repair Pine Glen. The town has all but decided to rebuild the police station on its current site next to the town common, and a newly formed committee is beginning to explore the best path forward for the high school. In this conversation, we talked with 3 people intimately involved in these projects. John Iler chairs the Ways and Means Committee. He has detailed information about the taxes and the financing options the town might consider for these ambitious projects. Then, we re-air a conversation I had recently with Thomas Browne, the chief of the Burlington Police Department, to talk about the needs and the goals for that project. But first, Martha Simon is the chair of the Burlington School Committee. She joins us to talk about the next steps for the town and the committee now that a design has been chosen. She saw a lot of value in the bigger school, so I started by asking her how she's feeling now that a decision has been made.
Well, I'm very excited that it's time to move on, that we've made a decision, that we can work on building a brand new school in Burlington, which makes me very excited. I did speak for a while last night about how amazing some of the features that people are able to design and build into school buildings are, and I'm looking forward to that. I want to look forward. I want to work hard to make sure this is the best building it can be for the town.
Yeah. I don't think at this point that we need to sort of dwell too much on the process to get here, right? We have this building to build, and I think many folks who have been following this noticed some contention, I think it's fair to say, amongst the school committee members over what the best course of action was. So what happens now? Does that go away? Is it solved now because we have a choice and we can sort of build in one direction together?
Well, it was very contentious, and I felt there were some missed opportunities for having sort of more calm conversations about advantages. So what I'm hoping is that the contention will go away because people who were the most passionate have, been successful in getting across their message of what they wanted, and that we can move forward, that hopefully there are other decisions to be made, and I'm hoping they won't be so contentious, that we, will want to make good, rational decisions about what's better for the kids and what's better for the town, and what's, where are we going to save money and where are we going to spend money, because it's going to cost a lot of money. We know that, and people have to get behind it. So I think the biggest thing for me is my next goal is to make sure it's a sustainable building. We haven't built a new building since the climate crisis has become more obvious. And for one, I don't want to build a building that's in 20 years we're going to have to retrofit it. Very expensive. So I want to make sure that we do the best we can for our children and our planet in building a sustainable building.
What did you learn about the Burlington community as a result of the input and as a result of the process to get here?
I learned that I'm not a great politician, and that but that there are people who feel really passionately about their neighborhoods and that they made their case, and that other people that I spoke to who were not as directly involved had other opinions. And so what I had to do was make a decision for myself. But I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to get a great building for the town of Burlington.
Financially, I think this smaller school, the 325 student school, replacing the school on the Fox Hill site, it's liable to be an easier sell, I think, to town meeting, which needs to fund the project, and to the voters who will likely need to pass a debt exclusion in order to get us the money to make this happen. Is there a little bit of a relief there that this might be an easier sell?
It will definitely be a small, it'll be, I think they said about $100 per year less tax increase. And so that's a good thing, because we know that there are people who don't want any tax increases, and we know that there are people who say that a debt exclusion will never pass, and I don't even know which way it's going to go yet. I'm not going to be making that decision. But it's a good thing that we can, and my concern is that we definitely need to also rebuild or renew the high school. And so I don't know how we can get people to support this school, and then also to have the same energy and enthusiasm to support the rebuild of the high school, because since before I've been on the school committee, the high school was the top priority building project. And we ended up here in a convoluted way. But about 4 years ago, I said, we can't wait for MSBA. It's just not going to happen. My first few years on the committee, people all said, it won't fly in Burlington if we don't get MSBA support for the high school. We should wait. And because I started pushing, we got the HVAC feasibility study, and we got, now we have the Burlington High School Building Committee, and we're in process of the bids are out for an owner's project manager. So I'm very pleased that we are moving forward with that.
So as part of the same conversation, I'm speaking with John Iler, chair of the Ways and Means Committee, and his message to me was essentially, we don't know what the options are for the high school. In the Fox Hill project, even until, weeks ago, there were, maybe months ago, there were some options for simply repairing Fox Hill. For Fox Hill, that seemed like it wouldn't have been the right decision. Those options were eliminated fairly quickly. But as part of
they were also more expensive than a new building. Yeah.
As part of the feasibility study, the owner's project manager, the designer, the committee will likely be looking at options that include repair. And that would likely be an easier financial pill, both in terms of the actual finances and in terms of the politics. So do you have a sense for that, or is that too far down the road for you at this point?
Well, I have lots of hopes of how we could do it without having to build a brand new high school, how we might be able to do it in phases, how we could perhaps save this part and keep that part. But we also know that just the HVAC alone is going to cost at least $80 million. With the upgrades to ADA accessibility and sprinklers and things that we've been grandfathered in. And those are all important things that we should have in our one high school.
So at that point, we might as well, kind of a thing?
And, we have science labs from 1971 and that kind of thing. So,
going back to the elementary schools for a minute, one of the concerns in choosing the 325 student school, the smaller school, was that it could create what could be perceived as an equity problem. And by that I mean we would have 3 newer schools, and then Pine Glen would be left older and having gone longer without a significant renovation. What questions need to be answered for that, or what happens to Pine Glen now that this choice has been made?
Well, I think for me, Pine Glen will continue to get the repairs and maintenance that we've done. The reason why, I think that we had the teachers just last night telling us how it's a great building, and it's been upgraded, and it's a very nice school. And people in Pine Glen didn't come out and say we want a new building. They came out and said we want to keep this building. So I don't see that there's a big problem with that. I think eventually we will want to replace it, but in my opinion, it has to be after the high school. And as far as the school committees from before my time, that was the top priority. So, I think that we can maintain a nice building. There's already, town meeting has already approved money for air conditioning Pine Glen. And it's turned out that the bids came in high, but we'll make sure we maintain the building well. That's something that wasn't done when the Wildwood School was closed.
Okay.
And as long as I'm on the school committee, I will make sure we don't do that. But we'll have students and teachers and programs going in there, so we will be maintaining it as we have in the past.
Okay. I want to zoom out a little bit to how this fits into the town's other capital projects. I'm not going to ask you to speak for the town or for the fire department, but these are conversations that include the school committee, right? Because in addition to the the Fox Hill renovation, we've also got the police station that needs an upgrade, and the high school will be a project that impacts everybody. So what kinds of conversations are you having with Town Administrator Paul Sagarino, with Fire Chief Thomas Browne? What's the tenor of those conversations? How's it work?
Well, we haven't had a lot of that conversation directly. I know that they've been part of the conversation in terms of the building project and the financing, and Ways and Means have been talking with them. So you've already interviewed John Iler, and he could tell you a lot more about it. Clearly there are other needs. As a school committee representative, I'm most concerned about the school building projects, but I know that we need a new police station, and I also know that schools cost more money than police stations, and then like the last fire station is just not even in the same scale. But because a fire station needs a big open empty spot to put your fire trucks, and a school needs all kinds of things, most of which are mandated, but which are appropriate and needed for our students to do well. So in some level it can't be compared because it's a whole different level. But I'm hoping that this town administration and the Ways and Means Committee will put together a package that works so that we can get funding for the new Fox Hill, for the new police station, and for the high schools, so that we can figure out how to fund all that in ways that the town is accepting.
Okay. So this vote on the Fox Hill decision to pursue the 325 student model, that's going to go to the MSBA at the end of this year. The MSBA board is expected to vote on this in February of next year. What happens then?
Well, even before the February, Donna Donisco, our architect and designer, sort of laid it out last night, if anyone was listening. But basically, we're going to be working on developing and designing the building. So it's not like we're going to wait till February for them to accept our preferred schematic. I think it's a PSR.
Preferred schematic report.
Yeah. So after we submit that, we're going to still work on: are we going to go with all electric boilers? Are we going to go with geothermal? Are we going to go with air source heat pumps? Are we going to use wood? Are we going to, what kind of flooring? Do we want the kind of, how are we going to design the classrooms and the there's a word that the architects use, adjacencies.
Yeah.
Things that are next to each other. What's going to work? How is it going to make it the best possible school? How do we learn from the schools that we visited what we don't want, but also all the things that we do want? So there's a long design process.
Sure.
So that's the next step. And that, I believe, has to be done by next July for MSBA.
Okay. And then in terms of when the financial piece of this comes back around for town meeting and for voters, that is liable to be 2024, is that right? Potentially May 2024 town meeting?
No, it would be September.
Okay.
Yeah, because we don't owe we have to put the PSR in July, and then in September we would go to town meeting and if necessary to the town for the funding.
It's wild to me, Martha. It's a year away, and in some ways a year is so long, but in some ways there's so much to do in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
So it's long and short at the same time.
Yeah.
Martha Simon, School Committee Chair, thank you very, very much for being with me. Is there anything else that you would want to say before I let you go?
I'm just glad that we can move forward, and I look forward to real productive conversations about the other decisions that have to get made, because there are going to be pros and cons to all of these things, and I hope it doesn't become a struggle, but rather a working together toward a really nice new school building.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
John Iler, chair of the Burlington Ways and Means Committee, is tasked with guiding the town when it comes to financing the school projects and the police station. A part of that conversation is taxes. As you'll hear, each project comes with its own price tag and its own potential tax increase that voters will need to get behind. Compared with 12 surrounding towns, Burlington has the second lowest residential tax bill, but still, it's tough to vote for your own taxes to go up. Let's dig in. I am here with John Iler, who's the chair of the Burlington Ways and Means Committee. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sydney.
So there is a lot going on, and the Ways and Means Committee, as sort of essentially financial advisors to the town in a way, has your hands in a lot of what's going on. So I guess, how are you doing? Are you getting enough sleep?
Yeah, it has been a busy time, and as you know, we have a lot of new projects coming up that are really holding our interest. With, as we saw just last night, the building committee selected the 325 elementary school. We have a police station and a BHS upgrade all coming up. So there's a lot to think about.
Yeah, I mean, as the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, how do you think about balancing all those projects in terms of time frame, in terms of financial obligations, in terms of politics? I know that's a huge question. But
Those you hit all the challenges on the head there, and really the town has a lot of considerations there. Just stepping back a second, if we look at some of the past projects in the last 5 years or so, we've had a new fire station number 2, we've had 2 new DPW/rec department buildings, we have a big MWRA connection project going on, and of course the PFAS filter at Mill Pond. And if you look at all those are things that are probably in the $8 to $25 million range in terms of project size. But now with the new projects we're looking at, so for instance, the new Fox Hill School is going to cost town about $77 million. And if you look at the other projects that are potentially coming down the pike, they're roughly 3 times the range of what we've done in the past. So that's what's really caused us to have to think about these things in a new way. And probably the single most important thing to do is to space these things out, which is what the town has done in the past. So for instance, the police station has been put off because the DPW building was seen as a greater need. And so that was one way of spacing things out. But that's what we'll need to continue to do to make these things financially smooth over time and politically palatable, that people will be able to support this. Obviously doing all these things at once is too much for people to swallow all at once.
Yeah, so the first item there is the order of magnitude, right? I mean, I think I've talked to other folks in town, Paul Sagarino, the town administrator, about just the skyrocketing cost of construction these days. So that's part of it for sure. But is there also, should we be reckoning with the town about, have we gotten ourselves into this position in some ways by pushing things off? Now we've got, X number 3 large, expensive projects that are kind of all equally important. I don't want to put those words in your mouth, but in some ways, have we pushed things off as long as we can and now they're piling up, or am I understanding it wrong?
It's a fair question. I just say that those 5 projects I mentioned in the past are things that we've spaced out about 1 a year over the past 5 years. So we've been doing a lot of large projects recently, doing a good job of spacing them out. But you're correct. There has been a gap prior to that where probably the Memorial School may have been the big project prior to that, and there was certainly a number of years in between. I would say, one thing that's probably delayed things more than we wish was, the attempt to get MSBA funding for the high school, which unfortunately didn't happen for quite a few years. So there was a change in gears to moving over to prioritizing the elementary school. In retrospect, obviously, it would have been better to prioritize the elementary school earlier, given the MSBA support. But it's hard to know these things ahead of time. So it's a constant trade-off. I think the select board has a lot of pressure to keep taxes as low as possible. I think we've seen with the CPA vote that we had recently that there's a lot of resistance to raising taxes. So in general, the town does its best to keep taxes low and has been very successful at that. But it's important not to delay these things forever. We have a police station that's has been a police station for 40 years, but has been a building for over 100 years. We have elementary schools that were generally built in the 60s. These are all things that we need to do. And again, it's not that we'll do them all simultaneously. The goal is to continue to spread them out. But it's important that we spend the money now when we can do it in a thoughtful way, as opposed to waiting for some kind of emergency where the heating plant all breaks, or we have leaky roofs everywhere.
Right.
So that's the goal, is to get these things going, and but still space them out in a way that makes it reasonable.
So you are in the maybe unenviable position of working with all of the different actors in this party, right? There's the folks on the school committee who are tasked with maintaining, upgrading the school buildings. There's Chief Thomas Browne, police chief, who's in charge of making sure that his police force has a safe and functional, effective place to work. And there's the town folks who are beholden to the taxpayers in a different way. So how do you think about negotiating with those individual people with those specific, their own goals in mind? How do you work with them?
Sure, and it's really an entire team with the town administration, Ways and Means, town meeting, the select board, school committee. All are very involved in these things, with no one group having the final say, so to speak. I think the key is to be looking at these things and saying, what is the most important couple things to be doing now. We spent a lot of time working with administration on working out how does the debt schedule look so that we can make this fit into town's finances, and coming to a reasonable compromise. When we're done, I'm sure we'll be at the point where people wish we had done it earlier, made it bigger, and it costs less, and that's the nature of it.
Sure.
No one's going to be completely happy with it. But I think the key thing is, in order to keep Burlington a great place to live, we really need to be making these investments and not just trying to save every last penny for keeping taxes low. We don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish, where we continually avoid investing and end up having a decrepit infrastructure as a result. And in fact, the rating agencies have told us, you guys need to be investing more. And we agree with them, and that's what we're trying to do here.
John, Iler, let's talk brass tacks a little bit.
Yeah.
Some of these numbers are to be determined, right? We don't have a specific number for the new Fox Hill. And like you said, this was decided, 12 hours ago, a little more as of this taping. So this is really new, but we have a sense for kind of what the order of magnitude is on some of this for the school. And then maybe we can zoom out and talk about how we're balancing these numbers when we add in the other projects. So I'm pulling these numbers from, I think, some information that you put together, this tiny URL Burlington debt that I've referred to quite a bit. So for this smaller Fox Hill school that's been chosen as the main option that we're looking at, the district is going to be kicking in about $77 million. And the average annual tax increase for the average taxpayer would be about $253 a year. And we should say, the average single-family residential tax is $6,196 a year. So for viewers at home, if you're paying more than that, your annual increase is liable to be more than that $253. And if your annual taxes are less than that $6,100, you're liable to be paying less. Is that about right?
Yes. Yep. So
give me a sense for the scale of that. When you're adding $253 to someone's tax bill, is that something that how like that's going to hit different people differently, right? That's going to hit a family where there's two adults earning $100,000 a year versus maybe a single senior person who's living on a fixed income. give me a scale of how big of a deal $253 a year is.
Sure, and obviously, as you say, it's different for everyone. I think a good way to think about these things is in terms of percentage of your current taxes, so it all scales. So, for instance, the Fox Hill School that option was selected last night, and there's some variation on whether it's 2 or 3 stories and the exact site and so on, but roughly speaking, as you say, it's about $250 for the median taxpayer. That ends up being 3.9%, so a little under 4% of your current tax bill increase to get a brand new school for a quarter of town. Personally, I think that's a good investment in education to increase your taxes by 4% to get that new school. Makes a lot of sense. If we look at the police station, that's more on the order of $150 for the median taxpayer. That's about 2.3%. Again, not having your police station in a building that was built in 1890.
There's some value in that. You're getting some bang for your buck. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that literally is a building with leaking roofs. So raising your taxes 2.3% for that is a good investment. And
the high school's a little scarier, though.
The high school is absolutely a very wide range. On the very high end of the spectrum, $400 or $500 million to replace the whole thing is certainly the kind of ballpark numbers people are talking about. Realistically, I don't think that's necessary. That's not a building that's falling down. There are things that could be improved, like the HVAC and some lab spaces and so on. But personally, I think a renovation program over time is going to be something that's much less expensive. It spreads out the spending over a number of years. Putting $30 million, just to pull a totally random number, doing that several times in a row could easily improve that school to a point where everyone's happy with it again. So it doesn't have to be a huge all at once, bigger than we've ever seen number. I think that's a very manageable situation, but yes, it's going to be a big project when we do get to that. As you know, the high school building committee is something that's just recently formed. So I think, probably 6 to 12 months, we'll start seeing what are all the options as to what makes sense to do there. And then we'll have to take that as it comes.
Right. So there's a world in which, and again, I want to be really clear, we're sort of speculating here, but I imagine that's part of what you have to do, what the Ways and Means Committee has to do is speculate on what it would look like under, 15 different scenarios, right?
And that's exactly right. And that's why, part of our job is to nudge things in a direction that we think makes sense. I think that going with, for instance, the smaller Fox Hill School from a financial point of view makes a lot of sense. One could see where that, with a combination of significant renovations at Pine Glen, would easily get both those schools in a very good position. That's cheaper than building 2 new schools or 1 larger school. And similarly with the high school, I think going down a significant renovation path is one that makes a lot of sense. I personally would, nudge things in that direction. There are Ways and Means members on the building committees also, so there is some direct input there, which is another way that things can be influenced, which I think is very appropriate and makes sense. One of the things I'll be doing next week is speaking with the school committee, talking about a lot of these same topics with debt exclusions and finances and so on. And the goal is to get everyone working from a common understanding of, what does this mean to the average taxpayer? What does this mean in terms of the town's finances, so that, the school committee rightfully is trying to do the best thing from an educational point of view, but they also have to be realistic about what can the town sustain and what will the taxpayers and voters actually agree to.
I want to talk about debt exclusion stuff in just a minute, but before we get there, on the tax front, we've talked a little bit about the potential impact on residential taxpayers, but we all know Burlington's tax base is in some ways deeply reliant on our robust business community, and that includes huge corporations, and it also includes mom and pop businesses. So is there a concern about potentially increasing the tax on that whole swath of businesses to the extent that we risk damaging our reputation as a great place for business?
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked a lot about the median residential tax payer, but as you say, the thing to keep in mind is that Burlington businesses pay about 62% of the total tax levy, whereas the residents are paying a little more than half of what they're paying as a whole. So we want to be careful not to kill the goose laying the golden eggs here, obviously. And there's been a lot of talk about that. If we look at the tax rates, the commercial tax rate is about a little less than 3 times the residential tax rate per assessed value. So if you have the $1 million home versus the $1 million business, the business is paying a little less than 3 times as much of the taxes on that same valuation. So that's a huge consideration. We're trying to make sure that that these things that we think are good for the town are ultimately also good for the businesses. The taxpayers vote with at the ballot box, and the businesses can vote with their feet if they decide that things are getting unreasonable.
Do you have conversations with folks like Rick Parker at the Chamber of Commerce or other sort of business interests to see what this feels like for them?
Indirectly, we're getting a lot of that input via town administration.
Okay.
I certainly have talked with Rick in the past, but we understand that concern. And we see in particular that vacancy rates in office space with the whole work from home and pandemic situation have certainly gone up. So we understand that there's absolutely pressure on the business community. But one important thing to realize, I think a lot of people have looked at this and said, well, the schools are really for the residents, why businesses are going to be uninterested. But looking at the big picture, having an educated community where people want to live here is something that helps the businesses also. So if you're a tech company, how do you get people to live in Burlington and work there? Having good schools is one of the first things that people look at in moving to a community. So it really does help everyone, even if it's indirectly.
And I will say, from my conversations with business owners in town, I think there's something to be said for businesses wanting to be good neighbors, right? They want to contribute to the community in kind of just a fuzzy good feelings kind of a way as well. So there's that.
Absolutely. And we definitely want to thank the business community because they have been supportive. I think they understand that we're paying a lot in taxes, but this is all going to a good cause. And Burlington gets a lot from its great location of being at the intersection of 93 and 95. It really helps businesses that way. And we've definitely heard from surrounding communities that they actually like leveraging being near Burlington. So this is something that helps everyone.
All right, debt override, or debt exclusion, Proposition 2.5 override. This is where I'm going to pull one of my classic journalism tricks, and I'm going to ask you to explain it to me like I'm 5, maybe like I'm 12, because I think a lot of folks listening have a fuzzy understanding of what this is. But hopefully we're gonna need to understand this. So as we're talking about these big numbers, basic stuff is we're gonna be asking town meeting to approve the spending, but we're also potentially gonna be asking voters, a majority of voters, to vote for a debt exclusion. So, John Iler, can you explain how that works, what that is? Like I'm very, very dumb.
Sure, which I know you aren't. Let's have a quick history lesson. So, Prop 2.5 was passed, I think, back in 1980. And the general the general concern, Citizens for Limited Taxation were the ones pushing this, and the general concern was wanting to have more control over how fast taxes rise, and if in requiring the electorate to be involved if they want to rise faster than a certain amount. So Prop 2.5 has a whole lot of things in it, but probably the most important thing is that the what's called the levy limit, or the maximum amount that the town can raise property taxes by, can only go up 2.5% a year. Now, the town doesn't have to actually tax to that full amount. In fact, Burlington has been very good at being significantly below that limit. But that limit goes up by 2.5% each year automatically, in addition to what's called new growth. So you put a deck on your house, your property value goes up, that's considered new growth. A business puts up a new building, that's considered new growth. That can also be added to the levy limit, or how much the town can tax. So when you factor in that new growth, which is roughly a 1% is a good rule of thumb for planning, that means the amount that town can tax goes up by that 2.5 plus 1% growth, or about 3.5% a year. So that's probably the most significant thing about Proposition 2.5. Now, what does that mean in terms of the town? So one of the things you notice is in that equation, there's nothing about inflation. So historically, inflation has, oftentimes been above 3.5%, which means in real terms that the amount the town can tax is actually going down in terms of constant dollars. So that creates a little bit of a squeeze. And also, historically, Burlington's levy has gone up about 4.8%, roughly speaking, meaning on a given property, that's how much your taxes are going up each year. So you'll notice that 4.8% is a little bigger than 3.5, which means that we're getting closer and closer to that maximum amount that we're allowed to tax without having to do something special. And in fact, probably on the order of 5 or 6 years is when we hit that limit, and all of a sudden we can't raise the taxes as much as we feel we need to provide the services the town needs.
So let me stop you there.
Yeah.
I just want to recap. There is a certain amount that Burlington is allowed to raise residential taxes in any given year based on a formula from the state. Because of the way that our finances are set up and because of choices that have been made in town, we have not historically hit that limit. So there's a certain amount of wiggle room that we have where we can just go ahead and raise taxes, still be under that legal limit, and not need to go to voters. But we're getting closer to that limit even without any of these big capital expenses. Do I have it?
Perfect.
All right, let's keep going.
So there's a few things that one can do to be fiscally responsible. What do we do to avoid running into a Proposition 2.5 limit? And there's really two mechanisms that the law provides, both of which are ultimately controlled by the electorate. The first one is a Proposition 2.5 override, which is something that raises that levy limit, the maximum amount the town can tax, to a number greater than 2.5%. That requires the select board to put it on the ballot and then a majority of the voters to approve it. We, in general, would like to avoid getting to that point because that implies you need to go to the electorate to get your operating budget passed, which becomes a rather onerous and worrisome process. So we like to avoid that as much as possible. And in fact Burlington has never had a Proposition 2.5 override on the ballot. Although I'll point out, roughly 85% of communities in Massachusetts have.
Interesting. So we're kind of in a lucky position that we haven't had to do this yet.
Exactly. This is not an unusual thing for towns to do. It's just one that Burlington hasn't had to do because the town's been very good at managing its finances. So what's the second mechanism? The second mechanism is that if you have a large capital project, say building a Fox Hill school, and you want to need to spend $77 million to do that, and that's over time, not all 1 year, obviously. What can happen is what's called a debt exclusion. And a debt exclusion is basically something, again, the select board has to put on the ballot. A majority of the town has to vote for it. And that allows the town to, during the period of paying off the bond associated with that capital project, allows the town to raise taxes above what 2.5 would otherwise allow you to do. Again, this is something that 89% of Massachusetts communities have done. It's a very common mechanism for funding these large projects. It's one that Burlington hasn't tried to do for 20 years now. Burlington has only had 2 debt exclusion votes in the past, and I'd say they're more than 20 years ago.
How did those go?
They unfortunately did not go well.
Right.
Those both failed. We did end up doing those projects. They were school-related building projects again. So
we were able to do the projects even without the override.
That's right. So we did the projects, and the issue. So why did we try to do the override if we could do it without it? The answer is we did not want to use up all our taxing capacity to do those projects. We want to have that buffer, so that if an emergency comes up and we need to raise taxes, it's something that can happen readily. And it's just good fiscal management to not always be maxing out your credit card, so to speak.
So that's really helpful. I think that's critical to understand, because thinking this through, I was imagining before I was starting to understand this that this was something that we simply had to do. That we needed the debt override or the debt exclusion in order to finance this project. It sounds like what actually may be happening, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're probably going to want one, but theoretically there is some wiggle room that we just don't want to make unwiggly.
That's a good way of putting it. I'll put a little more into that. So one thing I will say is, if we look at the set of projects that we want to do with the police station, Fox Hill, a likely high school renovation, some kind of project with Pine Glen, the totality of those absolutely will not fit within our current levy limit. So the question is, do we wait until we hit the limit and say, oh, we've used up our entire taxing capacity, at which point we would have to do a Proposition 2.5 override to even do our operating budget? Or do we plan ahead and say, okay, look, we see where we're going to be driving off a cliff here if we're not careful. Let's plan ahead and get that extra taxing capacity for this project that hopefully we all agree is a good investment, so that we don't eat up our entire buffer and don't max out the credit card, as I say. So you're correct. From if we look at just the first 1 or perhaps 2 projects, we could squeeze that additional debt service into our budget, and then the very next year we would need to do a Proposition 2.5 override because we've used up all our spare taxing capacity. So I think we want to avoid, again, doing things in an emergency, we ran out of taxing capacity kind of situation. Plan ahead and say, look, we see this coming down the pike. Let's get everyone on board with this and maintain that buffer. So that's the approach that we're taking. We would like to take. I don't think everyone is on board yet. The select board hasn't been asked to put this on the ballot yet. I'm sure everyone with their individual project, I'm sure the school committee is saying, I'd really rather not do a debt exclusion and run the risk that the town just votes no. Sure. Because they do. Let's just do it. But in the long run, that's problematic because we do end up hitting this wall where, say just for the operating budget, let alone these special projects, we start having to do 2.5 overrides, which gets to be a very messy situation.
John Iler, Chair of the Ways and Means Committee, thank you so much for answering all these questions. I have one last question for you.
Sure.
When you think about these next handful of years, when all of this is going to get ironed out, I want to know what this feels like to you. Does it feel like a math problem where you're moving around all these pieces, like tiles on a board? Does it feel like a mountain we have to climb? Like, how do you think about the totality of this in your mind?
It's a good question. There's certainly a lot of spreadsheets involved in this, no doubt. But I think really what we're doing now is what's more of it. It's an education campaign. It's really getting everyone to understand what's at stake here. We have a lot of important investments to do into town. Just saying no and putting them off is a great way to keep your taxes low this year. But if you want to have a run downtown with things that people aren't enjoying and all the services we like, we need to invest now. So it's really all about the education for me.
All right. John Iler, thank you very, very much for being here.
Thank you, Sydney. It was great talking with you.
With the forming of the high school building committee and the recent decision on Fox Hill, the school projects have been top of mind for many in Burlington. But Police Chief Thomas Browne goes to work every day in a building that makes it hard for his workers to do their jobs. I spoke with Chief Browne in August, and I'd like to bring you that conversation again now. Hi, I'm Sydney Bowles, news producer here at BCAT, and I'm here with a little update on the future of the Burlington Police Department's building. If you've been around town for a while, you know that this has been a couple-year-long saga. The police station is long overdue for an upgrade. There's been some news, so we're going to check in with Chief of Police Thomas Browne. Chief, thanks so much for being here.
Sydney, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So, for those who are not up to date on this, give me like the top 3 things that are wrong with the police station right now.
Well, top 3, it's just outdated. In the times we live in right now, we need a technologically sound building. We have a lot of water damage in there, and quite frankly, if you look at it from the outside, we've got a huge building, but a lot of wasted space. And as a result of that, we waste a lot of resources trying to keep up with it.
What do you mean by waste resources?
Well, so I'll give you an example. If you walked through the building, the 2 main areas where my office is and upstairs with detectives, the hallways are about 8 feet wide. It's wasted space. I don't have enough office space in there for personnel, but I've got plenty of hallway space, and you're not going to put employees out in the hallway. It was built as a school. It was not built as a police station.
Right. I mean, my predecessor in my role, Rich Hosford, spoke with you. I think it was 2021. You did a walkthrough. There was a ton of mold, windows that don't close. Has it gotten worse since 2021? About the same?
Well, the DPW does a great job trying to maintain it, but the problem is we're at the point now we're throwing good money after bad. So we're coming in and we're putting Band-Aids on things that really require more than just a Band-Aid. And these problems have been compounded over the years. I mean, the water, just look at the summer we've had today, up to date, and we've had a lot of water problems just this summer alone, which compounds years and years of water damage before it. So you can imagine what you're breathing in if you look up at the ceiling and see all the water damage. I don't even like to think about it sometimes.
Yeah. It seems like I was just going over the history of this. It seems like there was a mold study done several years ago that found no harmful mold spores at that time.
Right.
But you've been saying, you've got officers like coming into the building sneezing and having a hard time. So, yeah. So September 2022, town meeting, you all received $150,000 to do a feasibility study on what to do about this. We're going to get into the latest developments, but first start out with what's been going on since September 2022. What have you all been looking into?
So the town is contracted with Castle Booz Associates. They're an architectural group out of Boston and Foxborough. We've been assigned a project manager. His name is Kevin Witzel. He's come up. He's the senior architect and project manager for our specific project. He's come up with his team a couple of times. They've toured the police station. They've done all their background work with the town as far as the building department and assessors and everything like that, studying the existing lot that we're on. They've also have structural engineers that are working to determine the feasibility of whether or not the existing building can be built out and renovated, which it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So there's a lot going on around, behind the scenes, and then every couple of weeks we sit down with them and meet and get the updates. So what our ultimate goal is right now is to come into September town meeting in just a few weeks and give town meeting an update on where we are and bring the process forward.
What's the preview? What are you going to bring to town meeting?
So the good things right now is the architects have come in and they've studied 3 lots of land that are town owned, and they've determined that the best lot that makes most sense is where we currently are at, which for my purposes, and I believe every officer and employee of the department, we want to stay where we are. We like being on the campus. We're close to everything. It makes it easy for response plans. We're near 4 or 5 of the schools. We're able to rapidly deploy, and we're on that town campus. They've also studied some other lots that don't look like they're going to work as well, or if they're going to work, they're going to cost a little more money to.
Talking about like
to
the
build them
Vinebrook.
So Vinebrook, it looks like the new floodplains are going to just basically make
Okay.
that impossible to
Okay.
do. But another one they've looked at is just adjacent to the high school in the area behind like 125 Cambridge Street. Basically, it sits off the end zone,
Okay.
the near end zone as you're coming in the driveway. There's town-owned land there. But again, we're going to run into problems there with the wetlands and egress, because on a police station or emergency services building, you want at least two ways of ingress and egress, and it doesn't look like we're going to be able to do that. But they're going to be able to present it to town meeting as an option. Whether it's viable or not, ultimately to be up to town meeting. But the way it's looking is the best place is going to be at 45 Center Street.
Now, the subplot of that is there's always been some question about what that would mean for the sculpture park, which
Right.
is adjacent to the police station there. Of course, this is still to be determined. Nothing has been decided, but that kind of makes it sound like the sculpture park may need to relocate if that's what ends up happening.
So I believe that will be the case if we end up staying at 45 Center, because in order to get the parking there for the cruisers, police employees, and then to bring the community room onto there and allow for public parking, we're going to need a bigger area. And I won't get into like the zoning and the building codes and stuff
Sure.
like that. But
Sounds thrilling.
what I've heard a lot of is that currently we're non-conforming. So if we're to build a different building, we're going to come into different bylaws and building regulations that I think are going to force us to take over that adjacent lot and use all of it, probably every inch of it.
And I should say, I've spoken with Barbara LaRue, who's the chair of the Sculpture Park Subcommittee, not too long ago, and she did say to me at that time that they've been talking to you guys, and she's pretty on board with potentially relocating the Sculpture Park.
Right.
So that seems...
Yeah, I believe the select board and town administration has let them know that was a temporary landing spot for them based on the contingency of the police station. So, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but it looks like hopefully that's where we're able to go, and it looks like if we do, we're going to need that space.
Okay. So I want to transition a little bit to the broader picture for the town. And I understand you can't speak for the town, you can only speak for the police department. So bearing that in mind, the town's got a lot of capital projects
Right.
going on. We're working with the MSBA on repairing or replacing Fox Hill. The high school would be, up to $400 million project. And then the police station, which has been an urgent priority for quite some time. So what kinds of conversations are you having with other folks in town about how all of this shakes out together?
Well, you bring up a very good point, because, I've said every time I come on to BCAT, I may be the chief of police, I'm also a resident, and I'm a taxpayer. And my kids have had the benefit of coming through the Burlington schools. I have a daughter that just started high school today.
Oh, congratulations to her. That's great.
Thank you. My kids went through Fox Hill, so I'm well aware of what the limitations of the schools are. And I'm also aware of the capital improvements that have been necessary in the town. And this isn't to blame anybody, but like just take the police station alone. We've been on the capital improvement plan for years. And unfortunately, sometimes the infrastructure got kicked down the road, through nobody's fault. It just wasn't the right time at certain times to bring it up or to try to do the study. And now all of a sudden, these things converge, and you throw into the background COVID with cost escalation. It's scary. I mean, as a taxpayer, I don't want to see my taxes, go through the roof. But at the same time, Burlington standards are higher than what we have between the schools and the police station.
You mentioned costs. Correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is the estimate was roughly $30 million for the new police station back in 2021.
Right.
We know construction costs have just skyrocketed in the last couple of years.
Right.
Do you have a sense for what that looks like now? And we're talking super rough.
Right. The back and forth with the architects without doing a full cost analysis, because obviously we don't know what type of fixtures and whatnot, is about 40 to 45 million.
Okay, so that's 50%
Right.
increase potentially.
Right.
Does it feel like you're competing with the schools, or does it feel like there's a way to advocate for all of the above somehow?
Competing with the schools, no, I don't feel that way. I think that the schools have been able to get out in front and they're doing a lot of the public input right now. So they're basically making the headlines, but we've done that already. And now that we have some more information to come out and start to offer to the town, we're going to start to do that as well. We're going to start to open up a website. We're going to look with the town administrator to start setting up a building committee, so that as the information comes out and we're ready to give it to the town, we're there and it's available for people to look at. So you're going to see us come back in and maybe fight for those headline spots. But as far as being in competition with them, I don't feel that way. I see that they have a need. But at the same time, yeah, am I going to be a proponent for the police station? Absolutely.
Okay. Chief, I think those are my questions for you at this time. Do you have, super last question, a sense for when you open the doors, when you cut the ribbon, ideally?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, what I would like to see happen is us go to town meeting in September with an update. Then go into January town meeting with any zoning changes as far as the sculpture park and whatever needs to be done there. And then hopefully for funding in May. Then as far as that, then the bid process takes over and that's out of my hands at that point. But I would love to see a new police station by 2027, 2028. I don't know if that's realistic or not, but that's my wish list.
All right, I got my eye on it.
Yeah.
Chief Browne, thank you very much for taking a couple minutes.
Thank you very much, Sydney.
This has been your BNews In-Depth look at Burlington's upcoming capital projects. I'm your host, Sydney Bowles. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.